Journal of a Nord. My given name is Jonsten the Crow. I was born in Riften in the southeast of Skyrim. Unfortunately, I didn't know my mother or father. My mother, whoever she was, she left me on the doorstep of an orphanage in Riften. Not the most auspicious of starts. Of course, this meant I had no guidance from the beginning, really. I know that's not an excuse, as I take responsibility for my own choices, but it is a factor. The orphanage, for whatever reason, gave me my name. It's the only one I've ever known, and it's mine, so it is what it is. Of course, I was always getting in with the wrong crowd from the beginning. In the orphanage, I was always in trouble for stealing, fighting, or sneaking out at night. I left there when I was 16 winters and fell in with a group of characters who called themselves the Painters. Just a band of young, lost, and mischievous thieves, really. They took me in and looked after me from the off, which I was extremely grateful for, having no one else. We would hang around the sewers mainly, in the warmest and driest parts. It wasn't much, but it was the closest I ever had to home and family. Before I arrived on the scene, they were already breaking into houses and merchant stores at night to steal and cause a bit of havoc. In the early days, Reggie, who was sort of the gang leader, had decided to paint one of the inside walls of the house they were robbing with a tub of old paint that was laying there. Just larking around, he wrote in the middle of the paint, "You have been visited by the Painters." Well, word got around after that, and they heard people speaking about the Painters, and it sort of stuck. Stupid, really, but it gave everyone a sense of identity, I suppose. I ended up being the muscle of the group. If someone needed a bit of roughing up or someone needed to be intimidated, well, that was my job. I learned how to pick locks and disarm traps, and I wasn't half bad at that. I couldn't sneak, jump, or climb for shit, though, as Reggie used to say. Anyway, that wasn't to last. I was with the Painters for about 5 winters when a job we were doing went wrong. Badly wrong. We'd broken into a merchant's one night, but we hadn't anticipated them having guards. One of them had Reggie pinned to the floor, and I jumped on his back trying to get him off. He was too strong, and I panicked and stabbed him with my dagger. He just crumpled in front of me. Now, as troublesome as I was, I'd never killed anyone before. I was in a state of shock and panic when I felt a hand grab my shoulder. In my confused state, and still with my dagger in hand, I whirled and lashed out. I'll never forget the look on Henrik's face. He was my best friend, and he just looked at me, wide-eyed with the word, "Why?" on his lips, staring at my dagger, buried in his chest before he fell to the floor. The world around me spun, and all I remember was Reggie pulling and pushing me, shouting, we had to get out of there. We got back to the sewers, and everything was a daze for weeks after. We couldn't risk going to the surface until the heat had died down. During that time, I hit rock bottom. Henrik and I had been really close since I'd arrived. I'd never meant to hurt him, of course. Reggie and the others knew this too, but the damage had been done. It caused too much tension, and a few weeks later I decided to leave. I didn't feel like I deserved to be there anymore. I'd ruined everything. It was at that moment I vowed never to draw a weapon on anyone ever again. I won't even carry one and haven't to this day. Any time I've tried anyway, even holding one, I'm overwhelmed with a heavy sense of pressure. My skin prickles and my heartbeat races, and everything around me gets this unreal quality about it. Sort of like I'm there but not really there, if that makes sense. I just feel panic and want to run, to hide, but everywhere I turn there's only fear. It's weird as hell and I hate it. Anyway, I traveled Skyrim after that for years. No purpose, no reason, just surviving. I did odd jobs, working in taverns, chopping wood, and some security work from time to time, and yes, the irony isn't lost on me, as despite everything I was still in good shape, even though I did drink a lot too. Well, there wasn't a lot else to do when I wasn't working. I'd work off the groggy head the next day by getting up early and running, or taking it out on the logs, whatever it took to sweat the alcohol out of me, like a purging. It was also, in a way, a form of self-punishment, really, the alcohol and the excessive physical exertion. I've always felt guilty for Henrik and still do. Not sure I can ever forgive myself. All of that leads to me being a very grumpy man, generally. I don't mean to be, but I can't shake this darkness that seems to be my constant companion. I also have a low tolerance for most things and have a bit of a temper, which has led to more than a few nights in a jail cell. Somehow, I ended up in Dawnstar in my middle 30s. I met a man there called Sven. He must have been around 65 winters when I met him, but he had a youthful lust for life. We were chatting over a tankard of ale, and I told him my story and said I was looking for work. Sven offered me a job there and then, and we became great friends. The job was that of a simple handyman, but thanks to Sven, I learned a lot of other things over the years. He also seemed to understand my darkness and looked out for me when I wasn't myself or going through one of my drinking binges. The man had the patience of a saint, and I still, to this day, have no idea why he took care of me like he did. Sven was what he called an archaeologist. He was a wealthy man due to his parents, although he was always coy about sharing any real details here, and he spent his time studying tomes, materials, and artifacts from ancient history. He said he would teach me, and, the divines bless him, he tried. I found it fascinating and all, but I didn't seem to have the discipline or intelligence to retain it all, and I wasn't big on the books. Now, if I'd had the opportunity to do what Sven did in his earlier years, digging around ancient ruins and stuff like that, maybe that would have held my interest a little more. I did like looking at all the materials he'd acquired over the years, though, and hearing the stories behind them. But the books? Nah, I just couldn't seem to keep the concentration. Sven owned what I can only call a small stronghold outside of Dawnstar. He said he liked to try and give something back to the community he'd lived in for nearly half a century. So he allowed people to set up a small chapel of worship there to the divines. There was a vast library that people could use, and some healers that set themselves up to help the people of Dawnstar and the neighbouring villages. He was a good man, Sven. People appeared to like him, and he seems to have always been around, but no one could clearly remember when he arrived or where he came from. And he always managed to change the subject if the matter was raised, and no one seemed to push it. I spent 10 winters working for Sven. I did a lot of manual work, which kept me fit, and he taught me to read and write better too. He also encouraged me to attend the chapel regularly. Now, I'm not a strong believer in the divines. I have my times of doubt, I will admit, but they do give me a sort of peace when I pray in the chapel. The one thing I did really take to, though, was alchemy. Lydia, one of the priests in the chapel, loved that I was interested and taught me a lot about ingredients and potions. She also taught me some basic restoration magic and how it works. I could never get the hang of the other complicated stuff she tried to teach me. But I have to say, those healing spells have helped me on many a morning after one of my drinking binges. Life overall was good. Best it had ever been. But of course, something had to go wrong. I was going through one of my low periods and was spending a lot of time drinking in the tavern in Dawnstar. One night, another drunk started provoking me. Probably had his own demons, but I wasn't in the mood for it. After asking him 3 times to leave me alone, I lost my temper and punched him. He fell awkwardly and banged his head on the corner of the fireplace. He was dead as he hit the ground. I panicked and ran back to the stronghold looking for Sven. He listened patiently, as always, but looked at me with a sad and regretful face. "You must leave," he said, "tonight. Go and grab what you need, but be quick about it." I didn't have much, and when I returned to Sven, he had a small sack packed for me. "There's some gold in there," he said, "and some books." He told me to go to Cyrodiil and that there was a boat leaving Dawnstar that night bound for Daggerfall. From there, he said, I could get a boat to Anvil. He implored me to go and do something with my life, and spoke of an archaeologist guild or something near the Imperial City where I might be able to find work. He hugged me goodbye and wished me luck. I managed to reach the boat without any trouble, paid my fare, and we set sail. And here I am, on this boat to Cyrodiil. When I arrive, I need to head to the Imperial City and find this archaeologist guild Sven spoke of. I also need to have a look at this book about the Iliad steps he gave me. He left a note inside which read, "Jonsten, I've put this book in your pack about the Iliad steps for a reason. I think this is something big. If I were younger, I would like to study these myself. So I'm asking you to do me this favour. See what you can find out about these Iliad steps. Go and study the Iliad ruins. I've also heard of some Dwemer ruins on the eastern border to Morrowind, and I ask you to try and find these as well. There isn't enough time for me to explain more, so you'll have to figure it out yourself for now. If it wasn't under such unfortunate circumstances, I would almost envy you. I've never asked anything of you in all these years. You have more youth than I, so let's try and turn these unfortunate circumstances into an opportunity for the both of us. I ask you this favour. Please, write to me with your progress, Jonsten. Your friend, Sven." Now, I don't know. Maybe I'm a bit too old for all this, but the divines seem to have other ideas for me. And I do owe Sven. I suppose all I can do is see what happens.